You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas. This week, we start a two-part series with forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick, who talks to us about the Canal Killer case. But first, she explains a little bit about who she is.
We have very much enjoyed learning about the growing field of forensic genealogy. So this was an excellent opportunity to really get kind of down and dirty on the subject. So we are very much enjoying our time with Colleen Fitzpatrick. And we hope that you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did.
In episode 1, Colleen explains about her background and how she came to develop the field of forensic genealogy. In episode 2, she gets into more detail about how she helped break the Canal Killer case in Phoenix.
And that is some really, really fascinating stuff. I know I learned a lot. How about you, Bill?
I did too. It really is very interesting, and she's a wonderful guest, and I think you'll really enjoy this.
So without further ado, here is part 1 of our conversation with Colleen Fitzpatrick about forensic genealogy.
Thanks for listening. Welcome back to Mind Over Murder. I'm Bill Thomas.
And I'm Kristin Dilley.
This week, we are very excited to have Colleen Fitzpatrick join us, and we'll explain exactly who Colleen Fitzpatrick is and why she's so wonderful in just a minute. So welcome to Mind Over Murder, Colleen.
Oh, hi, guys. I'm glad that we could talk today.
Oh, we are too. So by way of introduction, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, my background is this. My educational background is I have a doctorate in nuclear physics from Duke University. I worked for the aerospace, small companies. I had my own company for many years where I designed, laser systems for NASA and the Department of Defense. I had a company on my own from about 16 years, and we closed about 2005 because of just the idea. It was a Bush administration that had more of a focus on big companies and not little companies. We were a company that did high resolution laser measurement techniques. And, we did a lot of high risk R&D for, that was an investment in the future. And that really wasn't the era we were in. It was more of a big business era in Iraq and oil and stuff. We got chewed up along with a lot of other small companies. So at that time, went into forensics by accident. I had my first book, Forensic Genealogy, done as a gap in the interim. And we went trying to figure out what we were going to do next, how to open another laser and optics company, how to do that and where to go with that. The book was published. It was a smash. It started actually the revolution called forensic genealogy these days, or investigative genetic genealogy. That was coined the term. It kind of cemented the idea that science and genealogy were compatible. I started doing forensic cases after that. I was asked to work with AFTIL shortly after that on identifying a frozen hand in a glacier in Alaska. It was evidently the victim of a military charter flight in the 1940s. So I'd say that began, my own revolution. And then we fast forward till, 15 years later, and here we are with, solving cold cases left and right using genetic genealogy.
So when the book came out in 2013, it was called Forensic Genealogy. That was the first time I'd ever seen that expression used.
Well, the book came out in 2005.
Oh, I see. And then the reprints were later.
Yes, the reprint finally, because the last chapter was on DNA and how to apply it to genealogy. In a few years, that had become pretty dated. we really felt it was time to revise it. The rest of the book had a few updates, but not as much as that last chapter. So in fact, we published the book with the new version of the DNA chapter, which is fine, but we also published that chapter separately in case people who had the classic edition wanted that chapter and they didn't have to buy a whole new book. We felt that, so it went back to 2005, really.
So you said you got into forensic genealogy by accident. How did that happen? It's a very interesting field to get involved in. What sort of prompted that interest?
Well, I didn't get involved by accident. I misspoke. I actually created it by accident because when you're a rocket scientist, you can't, that's your personality, on top of what you do. So you tend to think analytically, more than other people, not necessarily being able to balance your checkbook. Like psychologists, anybody looks at it from their looks at life from their educational background. So naturally, doing genealogy, I had more of a scientific approach, not heavy duty, but I came up with some ideas that to me were actually, really simple, and looking at my genealogical records. And then I finally just wrote that down in a book thinking, okay, I'll just do this book. The world I'm just going to fit right in with the rest of the world. I didn't realize that that was a new concept and that I let the world fit in with me, sort of in a way. So I just want to, as an example, at that time, the conventional wisdom for identifying old photographs was, what can you tell me about the picture by the clothing the people are wearing? And there were people that were experts and really encyclopedias on that, answering that question. But to me, I didn't see really much hardcore substance data, that other people could really latch on to. It has a lot of merits, I will say that, but there was more to it. So my suggestion was measure the length by the width of the photograph. That will tell you the size of the negative and the shape of the negative. Look up what camera could use that size negative. There were many Kodak cameras that produce photographs of different format. So figure out which camera was compatible with that format, and then find out what dates that camera was on the market, and that will give you the dates for the photograph. Now, that's analytical thinking. It's not hard for anybody to do that, but that was sort of a revolution, the way people started looking at things. So the book started flying off the shelves. We didn't expect this. We just thought, okay, we'll just write a book, okay, and then we'll figure out what laser company to do next. But that's not the way it worked, and it wound up really changing the way we see genealogy.
I have a quick side question here before we continue on forensic genealogy. Does it bother you when people make jokes about you being a rocket scientist?
No, in fact, no, it doesn't. I get a laugh out of it because I don't look like a rocket scientist. I look like a little old lady in the grocery store, So, I surprise people. I get my jollies out of surprising them. So I went to go sign up at the gym one day, and I was coming home from work years ago. I was really tired. And the guy had all kind of plans. If you pay now, we don't raise the dues after 3 years, but if you only pay half, then we go up 10%. But then we don't have to if you put it on your credit card. It was a little bit complicated because I was tired. And I asked him to repeat it 3 times. And after a while, he said, listen, lady, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out.
And you replied?
And I just held back. And then I actually signed up, figured it out and signed up. And he had to fill out the form. What do you do for a living? I said, I'm a rocket scientist. And I couldn't figure out. So that was like a little inside joke between us.
And
so,
his condescending, snarky remark.
Actually, I am a rocket scientist. So what do you think? No, I can't help it. I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, and it's funny, too, when you said you don't look like a rocket scientist. And again, I'm not in the field, although I'm a big admirer. I was thinking, I'm not actually sure what a rocket scientist is supposed to look like. I
know.
I remember some pictures of Werner von Braun from textbooks, but I guess the rest of the folks would look like standard issue NASA types with white shirts and
you would think so,
and a rumpled black tie in Mission Control or whatever.
Right. Yes, you would think that, and we look normal. We don't. None of us are normal, but I'd say we look normal. But I don't like to go to parties where a lot of people don't know me because the subject is going to come up. What do you do for a living? I've tried lying and it doesn't work. The next thing that happens is we're going to play charades, right? Or Scrabble, and I'm going to blow them out of the water. One time we played Scrabble. I was playing Scrabble with this new group at church. They didn't know me very well, the girls against the boys. And every time I got up, I guessed the puzzle. And so one gal, we had a puzzle. The final puzzle was the girl got up and looked like she was looking in a file cabinet. Mm-hmm. And the subject was movies. And I said, the Odessa file. It took me a microsecond. And it was right. And the whole room turned around and looked at me.
That's a pretty obscure answer, though.
And at the time it was. And I mean, that was a movie not to. And the whole room looked at me. And one girl who knew me blurted out, "Oh, my God, no wonder she's got a PhD in nuclear physics from Duke." And I was like a rabbit in the headlight, like I had a banana growing out of my nose. People were staring at me like, what's wrong?
Well, if we're ever putting together Team Scrabble, Kristin and I want you on our team.
Yes, for sure.
Right, Scrabble. And the worst part is playing Scrabble with another rocket scientist.
Oh, man.
Because you wind up after all night, you each won half the games, and you have to then endure the next hour of excuses why you didn't win the other half.
You also, I think words and terms that the rest of us don't even know.
I wouldn't. Well, we have, not that we don't know, we access them. Or maybe we do. And if you really want to waste a whole evening, I have a friend, I won't tell you his name, ask him what his IQ is. And he will go all evening telling you about the test he took and how.
Oh, no, really?
The plus and minus, this one varies. But he took a different one and it shows slightly different. But the statistics for that one behind it, I laugh at that. So that's his, it's okay. He's a good sport. We all laugh with him and not at him.
Well, let me follow up Kristin's very good question from a second ago. What were the original family things you were exploring or whatever? What got you into genealogy initially?
I get asked that, and I want to say I never got into genealogy. I never got into forensic genealogy. I created it. I never became a genealogist. I was born that way because I was in New Orleans, very interesting city, one of the most interesting cities in the United States. Arguably so. Mm-hmm.
And great food and music and everything else.
Music, history.
Sure.
It was a Union town in the middle of a Confederate state. It has that long history of France and Spain and the Caribbean and the food and the way we cook, not the quality of what we cook, what we eat, the way the Catholics think. The cemeteries we have.
Oh, sure.
The large families, the richness of that history. And I knew all four of my grandparents until I was an adult. And I didn't even know, how wonderful, what a unique gift that was until I got much older. And I, met people and we discussed it, and they didn't know any of their grandparents. And I knew all of them till I was an adult. My last one died. I was 39 years old. So I had, growing up in this huge, I knew their aunts and uncles. I knew their brothers and sisters in some cases. And they could talk to me about people that died 100 years or more before because they had the stories from their own parents. So I grew up around living history. I couldn't get interested in it because it was there. I couldn't get interested in it any more than I could get interested in having brown hair or being female or loving math or, I couldn't get interested in something that I am already.
Wow. So it was part of you. It was part of your DNA.
Absolutely. It was part of whatever goes into making a person. You think about who you are, growing up in New England. when did you get interested in growing up in New England? Oh, never, never.
Yeah, it's just part of your upbringing, your nature.
Yeah, and you never question when you're young. You never question that anything's different. You never question there are people out there that didn't have this big family. You never question that every place on earth. You think every place on earth is like New Orleans with the history and the Mardi Gras and the traditions and what we eat, the cemeteries, where we go, how we think, the church, the role of the church in the whole story here. You never think that the world's different. You never realize that as a child. That is what it is. That is it. That is you, and that is it. But then you grow up and you realize what a gift that was. And that I grew up around living history. And that's where we are today.
Interesting.
So what were some of the first cases that you worked on that you felt you could reliably apply this forensic genealogy concepts to? Talk a little bit about that. I know you mentioned the hand and the glacier. Can you give us a little bit more information about that?
Well, I can, but let me say that before I did that one kind of oiled me for a few things, because actually the book came out. We had a website in 2005. Look, we were total klutzes. This is my partner, Andy, and I. We're rocket scientists. We know nothing about marketing. We just wrote a book, right? But we put up a website, and then someone came to my website and said, "Can you help me find somebody?" And I said, "What? Can you help me find? You're a forensic genealogist." I went, "Oh, okay. So that's what that is."
Uh-huh.
All right.
Well, you had presented as such.
Yeah. Well, I didn't realize it meant finding people. I just thought it meant identifying old photographs. All right. So
okay.
He said, here's the name. Here are names of a couple from Taiwan. I would like to find them. They live in some obscure village. He gave me the village, Ungabunga Chunga village in Taiwan. And I can tell you a little bit more what I subsequently found out. He had something to do with houses that would be in escrow because the guys didn't pay the taxes. So they'd go in escrow with the state, and there was 2 years to find the owner. And if he could find the owner, he could make some business deal with them to recover the house. And then he'd make some money and they'd get the house back, something like that. But I didn't know that. I just knew that I was a little bit uncomfortable. I didn't know why he wanted these people. He said, they own property here, something very vague, and I'd like to find them. And I, asked, God, in Taiwan, it's huge. It's like a beehive. So I went to a friend of mine who was from China, lived in Taiwan, had lived here now. And I said, can you help me? You know all kinds of people out there. She ran a trading company. And she said, no, won't help. Mafia. These people, mafia, want to kill these people.
Meaning she thought the people you were working with were mobbed up.
Yeah. She thought the man Edward was his name, who contacted me, was after these people for some bad reason. He was mafia and he was going to kill them. I didn't really think so, but I kind of parlayed that a little bit with him to kind of probe him. And I had just an instinct that it was more than that. So what happened, I said, okay. I don't know. I stalled because I was trying to get some help, which wasn't forthcoming. So finally he said, how much would you charge for this? And I'm like, okay, I don't know. So on the advice of Andy, we were working this out. So I sat down at the computer. This is 2005. And I typed one of those names. It was a Chinese name written in English. I typed it into Google, and there she was. She was a professor at a university in Taipei. So the guy Edward had finally somehow said, I sent somebody over to their house in Taiwan. I thought they were dead, but people at the house told me they moved to Taipei. Okay, so I had a little more information. I typed this lady's name into Google. There she was. She was a professor at a university in Taipei. You really couldn't miss her.
Well, he hadn't done this himself?
No, this was 2005.
So it's early stage.
Yeah, so there were still people that weren't kind of into that yet. And I was like, what in the world? How, So I said to him on Andy's advice is, working in Taiwan is really, really tough. So I'm going to have to charge you an arm and a leg for this, but I'll make you a sporting deal. If I want the arm up front, but you give me 4 days. If I can't find him in 4 days, I'll give you the arm back. But if I do find him, I want the leg to go with it. and he took it. He took the bait. So
and you had already found the person they were looking for.
Right. I emailed the woman. I said, "Are you so and so who used to live in the States, or did you?" And yeah, that's me. I mean, you couldn't miss the name. And so he took the bait, and the hard part was waiting the 3.5 days.
Your work was already done.
Yeah, I was blown away. So subsequently, in the next 2 years, I worked as a contractor for that company, that man. And I found he gave me like about 75 cases in 30 countries, and I got almost all of them. I failed on one. I actually had the guy, but I misthought. I made a wrong, I actually had him, but I didn't quite make the deadline. I just screwed up on the email address, something stupid. But I really did them all in 30 countries. So I was like, oh my God, this is fun. And while this was going on, Andy and I wound up in Guatemala. Long story, very interesting for another time. And when we were in Guatemala, I got the email from the Armed Forces Lab saying, we have a frozen, we're trying military charter flight, frozen hand, glacier. It's out there. It's called Hand in the Snow. And can you help us? We have 30 possible victims. We've eliminated, I think they eliminated 25. We're stuck on number 26. It was a cook named Ole Jacobson. He was a 19-year-old cook. The whole crew had taken leave in Shanghai. They had been on the boat for a year. They were merchant mariners that had delivered oil around the world. When they got to Shanghai, they were going on leave. They got on a plane, and the plane stopped in Anchorage for a refueling stop, and then it crashed into Mount Sanford in the backcountry of Alaska. So subsequently in the 90s, they found the wreck. 2 pilots found the wreck, and they had eventually got the help of AFDL to try and identify who owned the frozen arm and hand that they had found in the glacier.
Help us out with AFDL. What does that stand for?
The Armed Forces DNA Identification Lab.
Thank you.
They do a lot of the work with SIL and JPAC out in Hawaii. So they weren't genealogists. They were working with fingerprint people, retired fingerprint people from the FBI, a professor of crime scene analysis. They had a few experts helping them. They had eliminated 25 out of the 30 possible victims through fingerprints and through DNA. But they were getting to the bottom of the barrel. We're talking about a plane crash in 1948. We're talking about people that on that plane that were born in the 1890s. We're looking at, when you get to those last 5, the military records have been lost. The fingerprint cards are not legible. You got to find relatives that are who knows where after so many years. So they really got stuck. And the one they got stuck on was Ole Jacobson. So I got an email. I'm in Guatemala City at our, hotel, and here's got the email. And it took me, I'm a genealogist, it took me an hour to find Ole Jacobson in the census records. His name was Oland. And it was not Jacobson, it was Jacob's son. This is standard genealogy stuff, but okay, I know how to do it. So I thanked him. I said, this is what you do. This is his parents' names. He may have, look for a cousin, blah, blah, blah. So they took it from there, and I said, bye. Really nice to help you out. But I was put on a mailing list of the people that were kind of working on this case. And they said, they found out they traced a relative to Staten Island, a Lutheran minister, and that wasn't him. It turned out that the Lutheran minister gave a DNA reference sample to match against the frozen hand, and it wasn't him. There was no match. So Ole Jacobson did not own that arm and hand. So you had maybe 4 or 5 more people left, and I was getting more engaged in this story. I'm watching these emails fly by, and then finally they eliminated 26, 7, 8, 9 had no fingerprint cards, or they couldn't do anything with that one. So we got to number 30. That was it. If we didn't make number 30, so, it turned out this man who was Frank Van Zant was his name. He was born in upstate New York. His father was Orville Van Zandt. His mother was Margaret Conway. The problem was, we're looking for a mito reference because the DNA is going to be so bad that, mitochondrial DNA is very abundant. And you go after that first. It's more likely enough mito has survived over the years. So you go after but the problem is you got to trace the exclusive female line. So the lab, it's easier on the lab, but it's harder on the genealogist. So the name changes along the generations.
In Western culture, the father's name carries forward, and so it works from a scientific perspective, but not from a genealogical perspective.
Right. So, after figuring out Margaret Conway, who she was, and having input from the Van Zandts, surviving Van Zandts, that she was one of several siblings that came from Ireland in the 1890s. All right, now we're looking at finding Margaret Conway's family in Ireland. She didn't have any maternal relatives that were left. All the female lines had died out. One of her sisters never married. Another sister had 2 boys and a daughter, and that daughter never married. So there was no surviving female relatives in the state, female linked relatives in the States. So, that meant researching in Ireland. And that was, of course, one of my specialties that I had been doing for, at the time, probably 30 years. So there was very little you can tell me about Irish research that I don't already know that I could find out really quick. So the problem was finding out where this woman came from in Ireland first. It is a misconception that you can call around Ireland and find a person that was born 150 years ago.
It doesn't work that way.
No, but all my colleagues said, hey, great, who'd you call? But what happened, I did find she was from Limerick through a miracle. I just found one of Frank's brother's marriage record in the 1930s, long after Margaret Conway had disappeared. So once I knew it was Limerick, I kind of could go on the offensive at calling the repositories in Limerick, looking for Margaret Conway. Her parents were John Conway and Ellen Drum. I got that far. Any records that indicated, she would have been born around 1875 or something. And all the records, there was just no Margaret Conway's born around 1875, plus or minus a year. And that the breakthrough came because the other genealogist talked to the Van Zandts and found the names of her brothers, a few brothers and sisters that come over here. And we were able to match that with some records from Family Search. And absolutely right. She wasn't born in 1875. She was born closer to 1870. She had lied about her age. So we were able to figure all that out. Once I knew it was Limerick, I started calling, being referred to from one person to his cousin, to the neighbor that used to live next door to the Conways, to somebody else, to another church. And finally, I arrived at a Mary Conway, who said she had married into the family and that she didn't know enough about them, but that her brother-in-law, her husband had died, her brother-in-law, Morris Conway, might be able to help me. So if you can really think about this, I got his private cell phone number and I called Morris Conway and I introduced myself as a consultant for the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory. I said, we're trying to identify a frozen human arm and hand in a glacier in Alaska, and we think you can help.
Did he think you had fallen out of space? I mean, this is kind of a weird phone call to take.
It was kind of a Kodak moment between us. And
I'll say.
He said, he paused a minute and he said, you want to run that by me again?
A little hard to absorb.
And he said, I don't know. Would you mind calling me back in an hour? I need to think about this. And I said, okay. And I sat there in the kitchen looking at the clock. In the meantime, he called his wife and he said, you'll never guess what happened. And she says, are you still drinking? What's going on?
Is this crazy lady from America imaginary?
And she said, no, go ahead and talk to her because it just sounds, it can't be a scam. I mean, it can't be life insurance or, somebody selling you something. This is okay. Just talk to her. So he got on the phone with me and he said, I tell you, let me make some inquiries in the village. And can we talk tomorrow? It'll give me the day, write it down write me a letter, get me that in writing, but, give me the day to inquire. He said, I'm really the oldest person in the family. So maybe, but some of the villagers might know something. All right. So when I called him back, he said, I didn't want to really tell you this when I spoke to you yesterday, but I live across the street from the cemetery where these people are buried. He said, let me read you. And he read me the memorial stone that the Irish put up, for their families. And it was a stone dedicated to John Conway and his wife, Ellen, and all the children that had remained in Ireland. And so I had found the dead part of the family. I had hit the family in Ireland. That was the family. But then I had to find the living descendants to do the DNA test. So then Morris said something else, which was very interesting. He said, my name is Morris Conway. My mother's name was Kathleen McNamee. My grandmother's name was Bridget Sheehy. Her mother's name was Anne O'Shea. And I think her mother's name was Drum. You could have knocked me up. I said, Drum?
Right.
Right. And I said, are you sure? Do you know that for a fact? Do you know that by intuition? He said, I know it by intuition. So, we went forward with that. We sent him a DNA kit because you understand that's the female line right there. Because if his great-great-grandmother was a Drum, it turned out she was Ellen Drum's sister, the victim's grandmother's sister. The victim, his mother, his grandmother, the sister, down to the man on the phone with me through the female line. He was the mitochondrial reference I was looking for.
Wow.
That one phone call solved it, and it matched.
So you mentioned the concept of intuition, and I'm really curious because I have a couple of friends who do genealogy as well, and this is actually a question he wanted me to ask. How much a role does intuition play in the work that you do?
It does. It's 100% important and gift because you're dealing with people. You're dealing with the stories they tell. You're dealing with, you have to call somebody on the other side of the world sometimes that doesn't know who you are. You have to know how to talk to them. You've got to understand where they're coming from. You got to be able to interpret those stories because there's always truth in whatever story somebody tells you. Even if they're lying, there's going to be some truth in that story. So it's a great intuition to be able to listen and to we really, need to have that gift. It's very important on top of all the records. So it is very important.
So that's kind of the human instinctual side of what you do.
Yes, absolutely.
In other words, there's all the science and all that kind of stuff, but there's also this intuition question that Kristin's friend had wanted to ask.
Yeah.
It's kind of the X factor of the whole entire thing is the intuition.
Yes. It's very important. And I think that's why I do really well is I listen. I try to listen. A lot of people would debate that statement, but, I think that's one of the biggest gifts a genealogist can have is to listen and think about what they're hearing.
What, you mean they're going to accuse you of not listening?
No, it's not accusing of not listening. It's like, where do the mistakes come from? It's just where do the mistakes come from? And it's how can you get off track?
Something you mentioned a few minutes ago, which made me smile, was was Margaret Conway, I think it was, lying about her age. Do we know why she lied? I think I know.
Well, because that women lie about their age. That's not a modern phenomenon.
Well, it's funny. My grandmother, Anna Kelly, who's long since passed, but she lied about her age. She shaved off 2 years, which we thought was kind of silly. And yet my parents, in explaining it to us, she was 2 years older than Fred Thomas, my grandfather, who's also gone now. And she was self-conscious about it. And so she shaved 2 years off of her birth records. So, but
Just
my
out of self-consciousness, or
yeah, but years later, I remember my sister Kathy making a birthday card for my grandmother, and she wrote a poem, and she talked about in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and in 1892 along came you, and of course it was well-intentioned, and it was my sister sending a card to my grandmother, but my grandmother was pissed because that was her real birth year.
oh no,
Not the plus 2 year thing that she was claiming for all of those years. And I think on some level, my mom and dad, both very Irish, were kind of poking fun at my dad's mom's sort of silly decision to shave 2 years off her birth year.
isn't that amazing? I mean, I can see, you want to get in the military, you want to, and you have to, you're only 17, you want to be 18, right?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
something. It's just vanity, it's, so I don't think that's a modern, obviously your grandma did it. I bet you, what was it? Cleopatra was really a lot older than she let on. Maybe Cleopatra was 5 years older, but she's not going to tell you that. She's
Sure.
not going to tell all her boyfriends.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not something that I've, go in for. To me, it's you are who you are based on a lot of other things, but that's not a modern phenomenon. It's kind of funny about your grandma. I don't see what 2 years would be a big difference.
That was the source of it. By the way, on your Identifinders website, which is one of the companies that you run, there's a really cool write-up on the Hand in the Snow case and the crash of Northwest Flight 4422 with pictures and that kind of thing. It's a pretty amazing story.
Yeah, it is. We're changing the website too. So, it's on Wikipedia. It's out there. I try and fill in the gaps as I can. That was my first forensic case.
So since we are on the subject, can you talk to us a little bit about Identifinders and how you started it and basically what it is?
Identifinders is, I started and really we worked together under Andrew Yeiser and Associates starting in 2005 because of the book. But in about 11 or 12, we kind of got involved in military identifications, and they required something separate from just the Andes consulting company. So that was the official beginning of Identifinders. So we did originally some military stuff. I've done adoption searches. I've done historical cases. I've done frauds. I've done fraud cases, Holocaust work, Holocaust identifications, and now cold cases with the police. I've actually been working cold cases since 2011. With the Sarah Yarborough case was the first time a forensic case in a department or a law enforcement agency really started running with genetic genealogy to try and solve the case.
So there's a fair amount of jockeying for position these days among the limited number of very talented people that work in the forensic genealogy field.
Yes.
I'm not looking to settle that here, and I don't think Kristin is either, but it is something that we're very interested in. What is the first case that you worked on in the law enforcement solving a cold case category?
Well, that's the Phoenix Canal murders was the first case solved using genetic genealogy.
Okay.
Wow. So,
I forgot how many I had done starting with 2011 in Sarah Yarborough. I forgot, I don't know, I could look it up, but I had a couple of dozen or a few dozen. It was very slow at first because this was news, and I had received such bad air from the genealogy community that I didn't want to go out on my website, advertise, because, it was so brutal in some cases. And so, uninformed, let's put it that way, that the nonsense, I didn't want to spend all day dealing with nonsense. So I really, did my work. I did it very quietly, very well. And so I wound up in Phoenix in 2015, I think late 14 maybe, and winding up calling the Phoenix Police Department ahead of time saying, I'll be in town for a conference. Can I come over and talk to you about what I can do with Y DNA, comparing the Y DNA on a cold case to, you may have on a cold case to the forensic genealogy databases.
So according to the media reports, in October 2014, you were attending a conference in Phoenix, and you reached out to the Phoenix PD and said, can I come in and meet with you all and talk to you about the potential of using Y-DNA to solve cold cases?
Uh-huh.
And were they skeptical, or did they say, sure,
No.
come on down?
Yeah, they did. I mean, I think some of the officers actually were at that conference. It was ISHI, the International Symposium on Human Identification. I think a couple of them were there anyway, off and on, because it was in town. And so they were, said, I had to check. Whoever I called said, yeah, okay, whatever, let me check. And sometimes I expect, no, we're not interested, or we'll call you back. But because I was going to be there anyway, I wasn't asking to fly in, and, it was down the street. They were, they were open. And actually, the Phoenix Police Department is so forward thinking. It is just such an excellent department to work with. Now that I've really worked with them some more and got to know them, I really appreciate their thought. The thought and the effort they put into a lot of these cases. They're really good. They're very excellent. So I was, surprised at how open they were and the discussion we had. I told them, I gave them some slides. I got up, I answered the questions. On the way out, one of the people said, well, we do have this case. We're thinking about sending you. So we'll think about sending it to you. And I said, yeah, okay, fine. You kind of let it in their all court, and then that's it. And then they sent the profile over a couple of weeks later, and I don't even remember, maybe a month later, and we went from there.
Can you explain how you were using your proprietary software that you and Andy had developed?
Yeah, what we had at the time, there was a couple of things. There was a online tool called Y-Search. Y-Search, was like the Y-DNA equivalent of GEDmatch, basically. That Y-Search, you could type in, a Y-DNA profile, and the website would run and give you a list of matches and how close they were. People could post their profiles in the database and, looking for matches. And it was pretty cut and dry. Y-DNA, you really don't have to know the identity of the individual. You really just have to know what last name you're matching against. And I used that. And also, Andy had created some proprietary software so that once we got past, using Y-Search sort of as a proving ground, what kind of names come up, Smith, Jones, Fitzpatrick, we could focus down on those particular names. So in this case, I think what happened was I used Y-Search, I must have, to get the name Miller. And then I could follow it up by going to the Miller DNA study online and using Andy's software to match their Y-DNA profile against that data in that database. And, seeing if that held water, if there were Millers out there, or maybe the one I had found earlier, if he was adopted, I wouldn't find any more Millers. There's a lot of outcomes to that situation. And, I came up, I think, with 8 Millers, and they weren't like a big Miller family. They were like Millers that maybe didn't know how they were related to each other. I think there were 4 from the UK and 4 from Germany, which is, logical, because a lot of people from Germany, from the Palatinate, went out to England in the, I think, 1600s. So a lot of the people in the UK that descend from them don't know that anymore. So it wasn't like, here's the family, and the guy's the son of somebody like we do today with genetic genealogy. It was just the value was giving them a last name, and that was it. And it was Miller.
So it seems like that was really, really quick. Finding, you got the information in October, I think it was, and they made an arrest in January. Does it always go that fast?
It can. It's up to the agency, and it's up to how soon I can. They took a couple of weeks to get that data to me. So when I gave them the name Miller, they probably took a couple of weeks to check the guy out, to see if they could get a DNA sample from him. If maybe there were other Millers on their list. My understanding was that their list of suspects was 2,000, and that there was only 5 Millers. And so, of course, they had been going through the list again, kind of triaging and getting the people that say were more likely suspects than others based on whatever investigative work they were doing. And when I gave the name Miller, that made them focus on that particular name. And of the 5 Millers, there was really only one that jumped out at you as being somebody worth looking at more than the other 4.
Obviously, the police in Phoenix have got to be thrilled when you come back a couple of weeks later, having done your research, and you say to them, I'm paraphrasing here, but this is based on newspaper accounts and other things we've read. You come back and you say, I think you should be looking for a suspect with the last name of Miller. That narrows the suspect pool from 2,000 people to 5 people, more or less in an instant. Then they start looking at, we've got one guy of the 5. I'm sure they took a look at all 5 of them, and this guy was probably on the short list.
Well, he would have been had they got as far. I think they were doing triage in alphabetical order, and I think they had gotten through the J's. It was a slow process because this is not what you do every day. You have to handle violent crime. You've got to handle drugs. You've got to handle bureaucracy. There's lots to do. And it was a slow process. They were working their way through the alphabet. M was still a ways away, but it focused them on M's, Miller's.
You had proven through repeated cases that this technology worked. Here's a situation where, they've got to feel like, wow, this Colleen Fitzpatrick, she's a magician. She goes away with this information and comes back and says, you can stop looking at 2,000 people, start looking at people with the last name of Miller. And, we've just saved a tremendous amount of time.
Yeah, right. I understand that, you got to see in context. Genetic genealogy was not what it is today in terms of forensic work. So you got to understand that these people are presented a name out of the blue. And many detectives have told me that, they didn't get the connection with DNA and name. How can you produce a name from DNA? How did that work? I can see you can tell me the guy's African American. Maybe that can get that out of DNA. But how are you going to get his name out of DNA? So this was like a Hail Mary play. And I was told by some very prominent cold case groups that had addressed this case that really it had gone dead to them, even the brilliant minds out there. There was nothing else to do. Unless some new development came or something, the case was basically dead in the water. So you take a Hail Mary play, which is to their credit, name from DNA, whatever. Okay, we've used psychics before.
Sure.
And you connect, you give them one word, Miller, that one word. It's so small. It's huge, but it's so small. One word solved it.
But credit to you and to them for being willing to try this new technique. And this is, I know this is 5 years ago now, but that seems like the world has changed from an investigative perspective. And certainly it's 2 years ago about this time that the Golden State Killer case broke. But this is 3 years prior. You're breaking something that's so incredibly innovative. You have to give Phoenix PD some credit for being willing to try the Hail Mary pass.
Oh, I give them magnificent credit. Oh, my God, it works. Right at the buzzer.
Yeah, and I picture some cop falling out of his chair after working the case for decades.
I understand that, they got a call. The guys were in some staff meeting. You know how those are.
Uh-huh.
And it was late in the day, whatever. And they got a call from the DNA people saying, can we come over to see you? And they went, yeah, whatever. And they're all laughing. They probably want a raise, right?
Yeah.
And then one guy says, oh, I bet you they're going to tell you that they solved the Phoenix Canal murders, right? They have a guy. Yeah, right. Just joking, kind of bored. And then the DNA people came over and says, guess what? There's a match. That's right. You got him. And the whole room exploded. It was like detectives, half of them were bouncing off the wall and the other one sitting there in a stunned coma, a stunned Phoenix Canal murder coma going.
It's amazing.
Should we go now? Should we wait till tomorrow? What should we do? And then, of course, boiled over to this guy's and they made an arrest, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
He's on trial. He will be on trial maybe this year. We keep, there's all kind of delays and stuff. So
Right.
he's innocent and proven until he's proven guilty.
Agreed.
There was a CODIS match, but we have to go through the judicial system to really vet that match and understand the statistics and many other investigative elements to that.
Let's take a break here, and we'll continue the conversation next episode with Colleen Fitzpatrick of Identifinders and the DNA Dope Project, which we want to talk about a bit more next time on Mind Over Murder.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.